Welcome to episode 14 of Education, a clusterfuck in need of repair. This episode, entitled No One's the Boss of Me. Before we start, I'd like to emphasize that all ideas presented in this podcast are my own and do not reflect the thoughts, opinions, or positions of my employer, Emerson College, its programs, or its representatives. Just because you fear that you're wasting your time, screaming your truths into the abyss, doesn't mean that you are, because there's also the experience of the listener and the shared meaning that grows from collective thinking and combined truths. The enemy of agency in schools is fear. Welcome to episode 14 of Education, a clusterfuck in need of repair. This episode, entitled No One's the Boss of Me, continues the exploration of constructivism, but through the overlapping lenses of agency, fear, and me. Warning, this episode is about me. Me. My experiences as a person developing in schools, my experiences as a public school teacher teaching in schools, and my experiences as an academic teaching in higher ed about teaching in schools. Yes, it's a miasma, but I'll lead you through it as best I can. A detour about meaning making from episode 13, which was on people as makers of meaning. Last night, I went to a play directed by a student I know. It was spectacular, but that's not the point of this detour. During intermission, I went to congratulate her and meet her parents. You learn so much about students just from those few moments exchanging pleasantries. But I digress. Geez, a detour within a detour. Get some self-control, I hear you cry. No need to get judgmental, okay? I'll get there. Anyway, she introduced me to her family, and her mother said, I recognized you right away. It turns out she follows me on Instagram and listens to this podcast. I know. I was surprised too. Plus, she threw in the word fuck to entertain me. And it did. But she talked about how people need this podcast, how it's important to get this information out there. Important. On my best days, I think it's a good thing. The word important was a surprise. And this was the first listener I've ever met that I hadn't known before. I took two things away from that chance meeting. One, you never know what meaning other people will make from the meanings you make and share about the world, about the things you know, about anything. And two, just because you fear that you're wasting your time, screaming your truths into the abyss, doesn't mean that you are, because there's also the experience of the listener and the shared meaning that grows from collective thinking and combined truths, which are often greater than the sum of their parts. And the moral of that story is speak the truth even if your voice shakes. Guess where I found that? Wrong. It's on a pin. But those of you who guessed refrigerator magnet, you were so close. Good guess. But back to agency, fear, and me. In order to explain my perspective as a teacher, I need to tell you a bit about my experience as a kid and as a student. I grew up in chaos, true chaos. My mother was a mentally ill alcoholic with a very forceful personality. Any rules that existed in my world were subject to change without notice. So my foundational scripts were all about being able to adapt quickly, present my argument, and get out. I was exceptionally compliant in school because the order and predictability of that environment seemed quite soothing at first. But as I got older, school began to feel like a prison to me, full of unnecessary rules and surprising ways to get in trouble. For example, Once the old and scary cranky French teacher sent a student to the office for sneezing too loudly. No shit. Surreal. I remember sitting at school for the first week every year, looking out the window and crying, thinking, I won't be free again for a whole year. Honestly, you couldn't be compliant enough, respectful enough to stay out of trouble. A story that demonstrates this point. When I was working with kids doing playmaking, we did a show about life in middle school. Their choice, not mine. One kid in the group got 7 detentions on his first day of school. 7. All of them for being unable to find his classes. I mean, what the fuck? And not one of the teachers and administrators who came upon him helped him. They just gave him another detention. What's the message there? What meaning is he supposed to make from that, except that they're all giant dickheads? That's the meaning I made just from hearing that story. Okay, but in my story, fate intervened, and in the summer between my junior and senior years, I went away to the St. Paul's summer program. Yes, I got the big brain, as a friend of mine said once. I was away from home for 6 weeks with a bunch of other smart high school kids, many of whom were much less well-behaved, compliant, and scared than I was. And they didn't even try to follow the rules. They snuck out of the dorms at night. They went skinny dipping in the dark. They got high. They got drunk. They had sex. Well, and you can guess what happened to them. That's right. Absolutely nothing. Nada. Not a thing. No consequences. Because their behavior made the program look bad, so news of it was squelched. Fascinating. And that's when I learned one of the guiding precepts of my life. You actually don't have to follow the rules. As long as you don't hurt anyone or perpetrate property damage, there's not a lot they can do to you. They can't hit you. They can't even expel you. As long as you don't break the law, you can be a much bigger pain in their collective asses than they are in yours. And to these old eyes, that's what freedom looks like. I was a nightmare for my mother and my school after that. During my senior year, they did not know what hit them. Mostly I skipped days at a time, wrote my own absence notes, went to the beach and drank beer and smoked cigarettes during free periods. It was an education. I had discovered agency, and it was good. Never having experienced it before, in my lifetime of keeping my head down, staying silent, being one of the smart kids and saving all my resistance for my mother, who, you'll have to take my word for this, deserved it, I spent the next 6 years exploring the limits of my own agency. I did pretty much whatever I wanted to. I did develop a healthy respect for the potential consequences of applying that agency without caution, like the time I backed off a cliff in a national forest on a rainy night 17 miles from the nearest town. But that's a story for another time. And without support and guidance, I floundered for a while in dead-end jobs. Have you ever worked in a shoe factory? I have, multiple times. Before being lured back to college by my father when I was 23. There's another component of this tale related to my rejection at age 15 of any input from my mother. Too personal for this venue, but a factor in what happened. But college is where I discovered that my sense of agency, applied with intent, could be a very good thing. It caused me to excel, to pursue subjects I was interested in, to push for the experiences I wanted to have in the college I attended. Eventually, I got my PhD, and I still didn't believe in the rules. I still don't. I've always said, if you can show me 10 people who are like me, think like me, act like me, I'll consider their rule base. Until then, I'm going to do what I think is best. I'm smart, I have an overdeveloped sense of equity, and I can't intentionally do something that will harm someone else. So I'll trust my own path. To be absolutely clear, I'm not talking about casually breaking the law here. That introduces a whole other set of variables and requires a different kind of thinking and decision making. Just FYI. So I became a teacher, a public school teacher. I never intended to do that. I didn't student teach in college because I knew that if I had a license, I'd be tempted to take a public school teaching job. But we make plans and God laughs. I don't have that on a magnet or a pin. I worked in a high-profile public school for 10 years with no licensure. I finally got apprentice licensure for a grant I was involved with because there had to be at least one certified teacher on the team. I taught on that apprentice license for 9 more semesters. And I wasn't the only unlicensed teacher there either. So you can see why my orientation to rules is skeptical, right? As a teacher, I worked in kindergarten through 10th grade as a drama resource, using drama and theater to help kids engage with, learn, and retain curriculum material. I worked mostly in role at that time and would craft lessons that brought otherwise dull or distant ideas to life with the students. For example, in a 7th grade math class where students were studying diameter, radius, and circumference, I set them up in role as a calculations business that did high-end math for clients who created and distributed a variety of products. I came in role as a client who had already done my own calculations, getting wildly incorrect products from the factories in China that I had hired to make the products. I brought in tiny CDs with giant cases, a roll of paper towels only 1 inch wide, a roll of toilet paper with only 2 sheets on it, tiny paper plates, etc. And I hired them to check the calculations I'd sent the factory to prove that it was their mistake, not mine. The kids did the calculations using their math knowledge from a recent unit and giggled as they realized that the mistakes were all mine. When they revealed this, I was horrified. I asked them to lie, to tell the factory that they had made the error. I offered to cut them in on the $150,000 it would save me. They refused, thank heavens, and explained that I was morally bound to tell the truth, to accept responsibility for my error, and take the financial hit. I was, of course, shamed and distressed. This lesson integrated 3 big ideas in constructivist teaching and learning, according to Barbara Rogoff. 1, contexts for learning are a requirement for retention of knowledge. 2, students need to actively engage with hands-on tasks that have real-world applications in order to maximize learning and understanding. And 3, the role of the teacher in constructivist learning is that of a coach or facilitator. But even more important, this lesson, and all of the others I created over 17 years, use student agency as a core facet of the experience. First, after explaining what the lesson would be about, I let the students vote on whether or not they wanted to do it. And I honored the vote. If a few kids voted against it, I'd proceed. But I'd tell the students, some people voted not to do it. You'll need to sit in the circle, the universal sign of in-role drama. You can't do your homework or something, but you don't have to say anything. And if you change your mind and want to say something, raise your hand. I'll call on you. This agency, the right to choose the approach to learning, was a huge hook for students. In 17 years, I think 4 classes voted not to do it. And when they voted not to do it, I left. No hard feelings, no test instead, no lecture from the classroom teacher. I just left. I used to tell them that it was fine with me either way. I love doing drama, but if they didn't want to, I'd just go get a cup of coffee and a bagel downtown. No big deal. I used to hear kids mutter, "I want that job." The second aspect of agency was in the context I chose. Most often, the students were enrolled as adults, or for elementary kids, older students. They were the decision makers. In all of the enroll work I do, the students are the decision makers. And what they decided happened. So when I was enrolled as an incompetent prison warden who only cared about the attractive prisoners and they fired me, I was fired. Or when I was a racist principal of a private school who had a plan to persecute the goth students until they left the school, I was fired. When I was, well, let's just say I got fired a lot. But with younger students, they had the opportunity to fix the situations. I don't believe in robbing children of their hope and their belief that good can happen. So when I was a nurse who was mean to patients, they got to explain to me the error of my ways, and I changed. When I was a cousin, taking away the family farm she'd inherited from her farmer cousin who lived there, I was convinced of my selfishness and wrong thinking. One of my favorite memories of that lesson is a little second grader named Dina looking at me earnestly, hand reaching out in a pleading gesture, going, You can't take the farm away. It's her home. She's a human being. She's a human being. I answered, well, now you're making me feel like a bad person. And all of the kids were like, well, you kind of are a bad person. So I changed. Agency. The final component of agency employed in the enroll teaching I did was the agency of being the ones who knew. The students had the knowledge. They had the argument. They had the answer. And when after the drama, I asked them to draw connections between the drama situation and what they'd been learning, they had the answer to that as well. I didn't tell them. They told me. I gave them the opportunity to explore the curriculum material through a different modality, a modality they chose, as a coach, as a facilitator. Then they told me what I wanted them to know. I've done qualitative research on the student experience of enroll drama, and the students spoke eloquently about what they got out of it. Even the most challenging kids rise to unexpected levels of engagement and insight, due in part to the agency they experience in role. To quote one boy, "Drama class is like where you can speak your mind. I got to speak what I felt. And that makes me feel good about myself because I never really get to do that unless they say, like, be quiet, you got punishment, you got detention, you're not supposed to speak." And that really, opened my mind and let me imagine more things. If you want to read more about it, look up Having Their Say, The Effects of Using Role with the Middle School Class in U Theater Journal. So why is agency in such short supply in schools now? Come on, you know. Okay, a hint. I hate them. They cost a fortune. It's the socialization of costs and the privatization of profits. That's right, standardized tests. And their demon spawn accountability. Do you recognize the negative effects of testing on learning? You're anti-accountability. Talk about where the millions spent each year on testing could be used to enhance learning in other ways. Well, you're a fat cat teacher who wants to protect their lazy-ass lifestyle. The enemy of agency in schools is fear. Fear that the media will depict teachers negatively. Oh, wait, they already do that. Okay, more negatively. Fear that the kids will rampage out of control, that we'll have to hire security guards and police to patrol our schools and maintain order. Wait, we do that too. Then what? In my humble opinion, I believe that the real fear is that we'll create adults with agency. We're making people in those rooms. We might create adults who expect to have agency in their jobs, who are less compliant, less unquestioning, more likely to recognize inequity and demand their rights. Adults who have acquired the skills of higher order reasoning and who will be able to call bullshit on the simple, sometimes ridiculous narrative of the media that allows millions of education dollars to be funneled into the coffers of private industry. But hey, that's just me. I believe we need to incorporate agency in all aspects of schooling for students and teachers. Jay Gillen, who I hope to interview one day on this podcast, wrote a book called Educating for Insurgency. In part, it describes the Baltimore Algebra Project, in which urban high schoolers in Baltimore, Maryland run a math business. Not a pretend math business like the one I described, but a real business with actual paying clients. They learn to run every aspect of the business, and they're very successful. And Gillen talks a lot about the role of agency in the success of that project. The agency of being trusted, of doing hard things, of being successful. Gillen makes the point that we don't give kids agency. They have agency, which they can use to undermine classroom objectives or support them. I believe that kids need to learn to apply their agency in pro-social ways that facilitate the function of classrooms and support their development of critical thinking skills. If we fail in our responsibility to do that, eventually we send them unsupported to drink on the beach or into a rainy night in a national forest where cliffs are plentiful. And we deprive them of their opportunity to make meaning of the very complicated world we're leaving them. We need to support kids' agency in schools so they can get ready, so they can be up to the job. And teachers who have no agency in schools themselves have difficulty offering their students agency in an environment which suppresses agency, discourages the expression of agency, punishes agency, and fears agency. So we need to support teachers in their expression of agency. We need to support their expertise in creating and delivering curriculum, support their commitment in doing an incredibly demanding job, support their right to have a say in how their work lives function. We need to challenge the voices that spew bullshit about teachers and education. We need to control the narrative. Ask the difficult questions when unexamined ideas are presented as incontrovertible truths, and help the public make meaning about education that makes sense. Because you can't bribe people into making meaning. You can't bully them, or threaten them, or test them into making meaning. People make meaning from a place of agency, because they understand themselves as the force that's driving their lives. There exists a human desire to learn and think and wrestle with big ideas and big truths, and we need to exercise our agency to support that. For everyone with skin in this game, I'm going to leave you with a quote by Isadora Duncan. You were once wild here. Don't let them tame you. The next episode will explore resources for developing student agency as a facet of constructivist teaching and some examples from a surprising source, teachers who do theater with students with substantial learning needs. In the meantime, if you have a constructivist element in your teaching that you think would be helpful to your fellow educators, please DM me in my Instagram account, educationclusterf_CK, or email it to me at educationclusterfck@gmail.com, and I'll share them at the next episode. I'll leave out your name if you prefer. We got 2 examples this week. The first is from Holly Tarnower, who does highs and lows with her students, high school and up. She says, super simple, but I could write many a case study on just how that has benefited the community in my classroom. The other is from Sarah Barnard, who says, quote, "This may be obvious, but I'm a super big believer in having students lead the process of developing background information before we read a text," unquote. She then goes on to describe a complex and elegant process of having students create a newspaper on the topic of the Vietnam War in preparation for reading the things they carried. In small groups, students research a 3 to 5 year period during the Vietnam War. Each student then writes one informational article on an event from their time period, and they're combined into a newspaper. They create their own well-rounded understanding of what happened in the Vietnam War. Agency, hands-on real-life tasks, context, and a foundation on which to scaffold new understandings from the book. What more could constructivism ask for? Thank you for those. As always, thank you for listening. If you have time, please post a review or share this with someone you think it might be useful for. I'll talk at you again in about 2 weeks.
J like the letter, I'm making several waves. I know the mission is same. I made a splash, now all of my passes last like running a race with Usain. I keep it coming like this is a buffet. And if I'm stumbling, I'm in the grave. Never gon' fumble it. I get the bag and I run with it, gunning it, gunning it, gunning it, gunning it.